Good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 4 of Climate Expo.
Adapting and becoming more resilient to climate change is vital for us all.
There is no doubt that the consequences of a changing climate are visible in our everyday life.
I think we need a very strong sense of direction, a strong understanding of what are the adaptation priorities, and then a means of measuring how much progress we're making.
It's very clear that climate change is here and now. COP26 needs to bring practical solutions that allow us to bring that to scale and connect to the knowledge that actually then informs local people rather than just what sort of global problem we're dealing with. We need to reach those most at risk. We need to recognize that the solutions are critical, but they can also be part of the problem.
We know that when risk assessment is owned and applied with development benefits apparent, adaptive behavior follows. Good governance at all levels, nationally through appropriate legislation.
The current climate is already a changed climate, but these kind of interventions can increase resilience. The scientific improvement is within our reach.
We're all part of an ongoing process of knowledge sharing. Building resilience to current and future climate-related risks requires strengthening the capacities of those people whose lives and livelihoods are most directly impacted.
Participation, in-country local participation, is absolutely crucial.
If we're wanting to enhance resilience to climate change, we really need to understand how risks may change in the future.
Extreme weather causes delays and disruption to railway services, and extreme weather is increasing under climate change.
Lack of information is not necessarily the most important barrier to adaptation.
Public opinion on climate really isn't that influenced by how much one stands to lose or indeed gain.
We found that in a 3-degree warming scenario and with projected economy of 2100, river flood risk in Europe can increase by up to 5 times compared to today.
And what we have tried to do is focus more on informing adaptation over time. So that's a positive. Lots of different people are saying different things about the boundaries and what's in and sort of what's out on transformational adaptation.
It is especially key to improve institutional capacities to deliver transformation. The formal education system we have are not reflecting the emergency we live in.
Incremental approaches were really not delivering at the scale and pace that are needed to manage climate change risks.
And what we're not seeing is research that looks at intangible aspects of heritage.
To cope with and manage climate change risks, adaptation is critical.
We need to develop climate resilient plant varieties, crop varieties.
The kind of top-down approaches we know are limited. Models tend to be at the heart of those approaches. Models as the kind of engine of producing information.
We're looking at the role of the private sector in being able to push for these more innovative models that connect the dots actually between this disconnect between individual companies and systems.
It's important for us to realize that the majority of the world is now living in cities, in urban centers, and this is the part of the world that has the worst air pollution. A really important step is to recognize that air pollution has impacts on health.
So the overall vision for indoor farming is to reduce food mileage, to reduce carbon footprint.
Recognizing diversity is hugely important, and creating spaces for recognizing what that diversity looks like.
Making sure that we're kind of bringing voices that are also left out from even the existing kind of local structures, I think are just really important considerations as we move forward.
How do we make sure our water use is more efficient in places rather than just trying to adapt to the immediate problem?
Well, we know that many species are shifting upslope and shifting towards the poles. So we're seeing expansions and local extinctions in different parts of the species range. So we're interested in thinking about how protected areas help in adaptation and resilience.
Biodiversity and wildlife management does support building resilient rangelands and can provide adaptation strategies for local communities.
In addition to the functional process of plants, photosynthesis, transpiration, tree species can remove air pollutants from the atmosphere. In Mediterranean areas, climate change is likely to influence functional processes of urban and peri-urban vegetation, as well as the provision of ecosystem services and quality of life.
2050, we expect 20 to 30 centimeters, no matter which scenario. If we don't mitigate, we can end up as much as with 1.10 meters of sea level rise. we need to mitigate in order to avoid the possibility of a catastrophic world.
And to adapt most effectively, coastal adaptation will need to follow a series of steps, and the approach of adaptation pathways planning could support this. And by breaking adaptation into manageable steps, different sequences, this can help to accelerate adaptation and limit the regret of investment.
For practitioners to adopt concepts such as resilience, they need practical tools that enable them to identify policy options and adaptation pathways that will help rather than hinder progress towards the intended goal.
So what we have been trying to do at the World Bank is to create a resilience rating system which tries to make sure the decision makers, people deciding about measures and policies, have the right information.
There is an importance of adaptation co-benefits and integration with mitigation measures. Conflicts between mitigation and adaptation can even reduce ecosystem functions and services and other aspects of sustainable development. It is important to connect adaptation with mitigation goals.
So when we do the outreach and share the tools that we have available, persons will be able to see what it means. So rather than just having the theory, they can see and practice how it can be operationalized.
Through adaptation and ratification of international and regional treaties, appropriation through translation is often the basis of legitimacy.
Building ecosystem adaptation can help bring back some of the things that we lost.
For Kiribatians, climate change is happening now. It is not a distant reality they can deal with later. Building seawalls to protect people is not enough anymore.
The Earth can sustain billions of people. It's just unequally distributed. Right now, the global north is consuming way too much.
General awareness and application amongst users or decision makers is still limited. We really need to connect these dots between climate information, adaptation, development, and that economic bottom line.
Funding is a real problem. How do we ensure that action-oriented adaptation research meets the demands of those who need those solutions?
Many local adaptations aren't published in journals or even written down.
The urban areas are the most vulnerable for climate impacts and for the well-being of people. We know how the trees are now declining in many parts of the world due to climate change.
Incentives. That is very important, not only for the researchers, but also the local governments.
The numbers of natural catastrophes have been increasing a lot in the past 20 years. We need to really transform the way that we do research, preparing and understanding scaling from the get-to-go, not trying to understand how to scale at the end of our research programs.
That mitigation challenge is really only half of the climate challenge. The challenge of adaptation is at least as big.
In the UK, we have a strong legal framework for climate action through the Climate Change Act.
The OECD has long worked on aspects of climate change adaptation. Adaptation is a subject that has a central need in governments.
The UK has had a very long standing engagement between academia and policy in this space. I still think that adaptation is still a little bit of the poor cousin to mitigation. And I think we need to move into an area around preparedness where we're trying to prepare in advance of the actual extreme weather events.
I would love us to have a climate assembly similar to the one that we had in the UK on net zero around adaptation and really build that public understanding.
It's back to communication. We really need to get our communication a lot better on adaptation.
We need to seize this opportunity of COP26 to underscore the centrality of research for understanding what works and what doesn't to inform effective adaptation.
Most research processes miss out the opportunity to leverage the knowledge and experiential knowledge of these communities. It builds trust when communities and at local level are looked at as collaborators.
How can we build risk and resilience more in at that global level to help communities on the ground to be more, to create a more sort of resilient, sustainable system? there's very little focus in a lot of the discussions at the moment about the role of adaptation.